Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. My name is Eddie Martinez. I am the Executive Director of Latino Equality Alliance. We're located at Mi Centro LGBT Community Center in Bow Heights. Our mission is to advocate for the safety, equity, and wellness of the Latinx LGBT community. Tonight, we have a special fireside chat with LGBTQ Latinx urban planners to talk about inclusion, identity, and community. And we have a lot of wonderful people here to participate in this conversation. So also, before I invite our moderator to come up, and I just want to invite you all to the Galaveta, our fifth annual Galaveta LGBTQ Festival will be on October 29th. It's going to be virtual, 6 p.m. So visit LatinoEqualityAlliance.org and register for the event. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator, James Rojas.
Good evening. Welcome to our fireside chat with Latino urban planners. And yeah, I'm an urban planner for the past probably 20 years, almost 30 years. I've been doing planning work, and along my career, I've been meeting a lot of really dynamic Latinx LGBT planners. And I thought it'd be really great to bring us all together to tell our stories, because we're doing the cutting edge work. You know, we've kind of fought for identity in our community, within our community, but now we're fighting bigger forces around us. So today is going to be more. Today we'll be talking about who we are, where we come from, what we value, and how our identity has really shaped our career paths, and kind of talked about who we are. So I'm going to just kind of share the screen really quick to kind of show you what we're going to go through today. So share screen. Got that?
To the left, James.
To the left.
Down here at the bottom is the slideshow. At the bottom, a little bit more to the left.
Okay.
To make it run like a slideshow?
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
Down. Move your cursor down all the way to the left.
I got it.
Lower left. Right there.
Yeah, so welcome to our little chat. And our agenda today is going to be kind of introduce the speakers, kind of 2 seconds on Latino urbanism, how Latinos are shaping the built environment, what childhood memory shapes your work, your career, questions, and closing comments. So basically, our speakers today are going to be Alfredo Frajo Jr. He's a lawyer. We're going to have Jose Richard Avilas. He's a transportation planner and a poet and artist. And Viviana Franco, and who works from lot to spot. And Ulises Gonzales. And we have Elena Popp, a lawyer, works for the Eviction Defense Fund. Ari Gutierrez, and Dr. Michael Méndez, professor at UC Irvine. So these are our speakers. So quickly, I'm just going to kind of show you what we're dealing with. Latinos are shaping mobility in different ways in Los Angeles. Street vendors, the way we walk, the way we move around the city. Latino street day labor, and changing the way we do business now in our streets. We're impacting transportation. Public transportation in LA is really heavily based on Latinos. The way we design our houses, we have this kind of new architectural style, but it's also, we have a lot of overcrowding. So a lot of housing issues are really big in our community. These are garage conversions before they became hip ADUs. We've been doing it for a long time. So now it's, so how do we deal with that? Well, this year, these are our front yards, our front yard plazas, how we use space, open space, and, for quinceañeras. Environmental justice, because of where we're at in the city of LA, because of redlining, we've always been kind of in these marginalized places, so they weren't really designed for us. So we kind of retrofit them in different ways. So community engagement. How do we engage Latinos in planning? And get them to talk about what they are. Because a lot of us aren't. We don't. A lot of us don't go to public meetings. This is just the final picture from, I think, Monique, this place in Woodburn, Oregon, where they took a vacant lot and they turned it into a little plaza for all the community members around there. Now they have the taste of Woodburn there, but it kind of shows the way, even in Oregon, Latinos are transforming space. So this kind of begs the bigger question, about urban policies in the U.S. As Latino planners, what are we doing that's different, and how do we start to impact the way we design our streets and build infrastructure? So that's kind of the starting point for this talk. So I'm going to unshare my screen, and we're going to start going into the speakers. So I want everybody on the panel to kind of tell us your first childhood memory or your first experience with your sexual identity that really shaped your career? For me, growing up in Boyle Heights, I wanted a dollhouse, but boys at that time could not play with dolls, so I built my own dollhouse. And since then, I've been building cities. That's how I learned about city planning. If you've ever been to one of my workshops, I use objects to have people build, because I realized that if I could learn urban planning by building, so can everybody else. So that's kind of what kind of shaped my experience. So you want to go to Elena Popp next? Tell us about your childhood memory.
Well, I would like to share two short ones. I'm a child of displacement. I was 8 years old when my parents decided to separate, and that was a good idea to displace us from where I was born in Acapulco, Mexico, to come to the United States. And I remember in our early years, my mother and I were very homesick for Mexico. So every weekend we would do two things. We would go to the Mercado Central, which is now the more bougie Grand Central Market, and we would go to La Placita Olvera at a time when La Placita Olvera was much more humble than it is today. And one of the things that is very, my spouse and I went to Tecate this weekend. First place we went is to the plaza to have something to eat. And the plaza is such an important feature in our Mexican cities, and something that is really lacking in American urban planning. But the childhood memory that shapes who I am as a people's lawyer and as a anti-displacement activist is that a couple of years after we got here, my mother spent all the money she came here with, didn't have any skills, and we ended up getting evicted. And so the sight of my mom crying on the sidewalk with the few things that the marshal let us take out and not knowing what to do burns very, very deep in my soul. And I work crazy hours, and people always ask me how. Every time I get tired, I think about that image and how I don't want any child to go through that, because it was a very impactful, life-shaping moment that no child should have to go through.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Very powerful. Ulises, want to tell your childhood memory or your story?
Sure, of course. So I have a series of memories as a child. I think when I think back to my childhood, I think of me being an artist, me being discriminated against, perhaps being bullied. That kind of made me into a more sensible, inclusive planner that I am today. I remember as a kid being interested in architecture, and I remember playing with my Hot Wheels in the parking lot structure. And then as I grew older, I remember being an Aztec dancer, for dancing for La Virgen de Guadalupe. And that kind of made, and looking back, made me, now as an urban planner, be aware of cultural spaces or ceremonial spaces that we don't really think about, that are, I remember going to the posadas and doing those parades that are all these makeshift events that are so important for the Latino community. Similar to Elena, I have some memories going to downtown. I remember as a kid taking one of the buses on Whittier all the way to Broadway and going to buy my tia's quinceañera dress on layaway.
That's cool. Yeah, that's great.
And then shipping that dress back to Mexico. Oh, sorry, this is a paletero. But I also remember going to elementary during the Prop 187 era and being in fear of potentially being deported. I think all of these things have made me a more sensible, inclusive planner, or just, as a planner in the city of LA, just using correct pronouns for people who from, making sure that we respect people. And also when I'm reading or writing policy, and when I analyze it, I'm able to really look at it through a different lens, a critical lens, to make sure that we are inclusive.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah, Ari, you want to talk about your childhood experience or memory or story?
Sure. One, since you tied it to the sexuality part, well, I actually grew up in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, the Mexican side of the border, and although my parents worked in the United States, we lived on the Mexico side. And so one of the things that that I remember from my childhood is, basically, getting dressed up and going out to dinner, walking down to the restaurant, and of course they had, the mariachi playing, and outdoor restaurant, all that, and just that feeling of family and community and place in terms of culture is a close memory for me. And now in my life today, I would like to be able to share that with my own family, and to be able to walk down. It seems so simplistic to say I want to be able to walk down a few blocks and go out to dinner with my family, but we are different, and so something as simple as that is something that we may be taking for granted. But in terms of urban development, I want to be able to see those type of welcoming spaces within the community, but also for them to be welcoming to our LGBT folks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great story. Alfredo, tell us your story.
So good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you all. I feel so honored to be among incredible leaders in our community, and having the privilege of talking about land use in the built environment when so many people are really struggling in our communities. And this is such a critical topic. So thank you, James, for your leadership, and Leah for bringing this forward. I have two distinct memories. The first is, I'm from Boyle Heights, but I wasn't born in Boyle Heights. We lived in a small apartment in Rosemead with our grandmother on my father's side before we moved to Boyle Heights. My father was a Teamster. He was a truck driver, and he decided he was going to move his family closer to downtown, and moved us to Boyle Heights. So I remember getting a chance to rent this house that, to me, as a young kid, I was maybe 4 or 5. It was massive. It was a single family detached home with a backyard. It had an orange tree in the backyard. It's right at that base of 7th Street and Soto Street, where you enter the 5 freeway. And I remember how proud we were to be living there. And of course, ultimately, economic circumstances moved us around in Boyle Heights. When people say, well, where in Boyle Heights exactly did you live in? I always say, where rent was cheap. And that's the truth. Until we were able to buy a house. And but that is one of my first memories, James. The other one I would say is in terms of the built environment, is proximity to the freeways. How freeways in Boyle Heights make a big part of our imagination, in addition to the Alley River, probably along the same level of importance. There's 6 freeways that I count that bisect Boyle Heights. I went to Soto Street Elementary School, and that's, between 2 freeways and off the off-ramp of the 101 and the 10 freeway. And so in the 60 as well. But thinking back about that experience, also going to school and being educated about urban renewal policies from the 50s and the 60s that were racist, right? And understanding how the decisions by white privileged folks that did not represent the interest of brown, and at that time, it was Japanese Americans, right, in the 50s that were living in Boyle Heights, making decisions about where infrastructure should be located, evaluating the disparate impacts that by smog and other environmental impacts that our communities have to bear the brunt of. And making those connections as an adult was a very powerful moment. And for me, continues to inform the kind of work that I do. I really believe that land use and the built environment is a tool for equity and social justice, environmental justice. And that's what I've dedicated my life to doing, is making sure that we build responsibly. And happy to talk more about that. I think we'll have an opportunity to do that. But those are the 2 very vivid experiences. One is having the dignity of my own place to live, right, with my family and my father as a blue collar worker. And the other is understanding that there are decisions that happen outside of our communities that have very fundamental, lasting impacts on the health of our communities.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. How about you, Michael? Talk about your childhood experience.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, James and Eddie, for hosting this very transformative and important event, particularly in historic moment that we're experiencing multiple types of crises and compounding disasters that are both environmental, health, social, and economic. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to focus and center on Latinos and LGBT people of color and queer people on the issues of how we can improve our communities through urban planning and other environmental agendas. I'm here representing two areas that are typically not represented in a lot of times in Los Angeles kind of Latinx diagram platforms is, the San Fernando Valley as well as the South Bay. So I grew up in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, and I currently live in Long Beach now, so urban beach communities. Vivid memory I had is growing up in the Northeast San Fernando Valley and in various communities, both Pacoima, Lake Gutierrez, Selmar, and seeing the environmental inequities happening in multiple environmental threats from landfills, freeways, unpaved streets, and sidewalks. And at an early age, my parents put me in a voluntary busing program, and I was decades ago bused to the West San Fernando Valley, which at the time was predominantly white and upper middle class. And every morning I would wake up 6 o'clock in the morning, get on the bus, and slowly see the built environment change as I rode either the bus on the freeways or we took the bus in the streets and saw how unpaved streets and sidewalks, corner liquor stores, trash on the street really changed to sprawling yards, sparkling swimming pools, and estate type of livings in the typical suburban Brady Bunch identity that we saw on television. I saw that firsthand, and that really at an early age spurred a lot of questions of our built environments, our infrastructure. There was massive disinvestment, and in primarily Latino communities, and why the Northeast San Fernando Valley looked that way. Another vivid experience I have is my parents owned and operated the first owned Latino owned bike shop in the entire San Fernando Valley. And mind you, this is a region of 1 million people. So we were the very first Latino owned bike shop, and really saw the inequities in terms of transportation and infrastructure that primarily Latino immigrants, undocumented immigrants encountered in getting around in the city like Los Angeles, in a suburban slum condition type of area like the Northeast San Fernando Valley, and how that impacted their mobility options as well as their social and economic options. So that led me on to focus on issues of urban planning and later on academic issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jose Richard, tell us about your memory of childhood.
Yeah, buenas tardes, buenas noches to everyone. I'm gonna give you a little chant. If you know this, then you know exactly where I come from. Y dice, somos pasajeros, queremos autobuses, no policía, queremos autobuses, no policía. So I am proudly a bus rider. I've always been a bus rider. And unlike some other planners that we know, I don't choose to not own a car. I couldn't afford a car growing up. And now that I tengo más privilegio, I just choose to stay grounded and rooted from, what I do. And I'm from South Central. And again, so for me, my memories from the bus ride. So there's 2 bus rides in particular that I can think of. Born and raised again in Boyle Heights, en Boyle Heights. Tanto Boyle Heights, yo ya también. Ya se me pasó. I'm not from Boyle Heights, pero somos primas. No, but my mom used to work in Monterey Park. So we used to make the bus trip from Monterey Park to South Central. And like a lot of folks talked about, like I remember on paydays, cuando se podía, we would stop by at Central Market, en el Mercadito, and go get some tacos Tumbras y Tomás. They're still there after 25 years. So shout out to them. This is not a sponsorship porque ya se cree toda YouTuber, pero So I remember that trip in particularly. And the other one is I grew up on the 105 on Vernon, which goes from Huntington Park to West Hollywood. O sea, from quinceañeras to gays. And I remember falling asleep once on the 105 and being like, ay, ya me lloran los ojos. I'm sorry, y'all. I remember being on the 105 and falling asleep and ending up in West Hollywood. And I was like, ¿qué es esto? What is this place? And being like, being a 15-year-old, all hormonal, like I had finally bodies to project my my desires on, and we finally discovered later that that was malinchismo in me, but whatever, that's a whole nother topic. But those bus rides in particular to me are very important, and particularly the 105, because I think it reminded me that the moment I got access to a bus pass, I actually got access to knowing queerness outside of South Central. Like I was able to find other queers on the bus, y éramos así chamaquitos y nos digamos y como que yo te reconozco. And so to me, the bus is it's a microcosm to the things that are happening in the city. I'll always be a bus rider mientras tenga cuerpo y tenga capacidad. I'll be a bus rider. Right now, things are a little different because of the pandemic and the privileges that I have now. So I'm finding ways to incorporate what I do as an organizer, as an artist, and as a planner.
Thank you, riding the bus. And last but not least, Monique, tell us your story.
Yeah, thank you so much, James, for inviting me and facilitating this space today. And it's great to be amongst family here. I'm gonna actually just share my screen because it's a significant corner of my childhood. This particular corner really helped shape a lot of how I do planning and how I think of communities. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, so a border community, and my family owned a small 1-bedroom home right here. So 5 of us in that 1-bedroom home. This particular corner, there's a park across the street. And when I was 8 years old, and at the time, there still's not stop signs, 4-way stop signs, but I actually was hit by a car right here in this corner here, and it required about 9 months of physical therapy. And I still have the scars to show that. And I just remember, you know, how scared my mom was, and I remember one of the first things I thought of as a child of 8 years old was how were my parents going to pay for the hospital bill while I was there, you know, bleeding and being rushed to the hospital. And so having a really early awareness of my family not having very many resources, and then also seeing how this particular built environment wasn't one in which that you know would allow a kid to safely cross to go to the park. And then this lot here actually is where our family home was. We were removed from our home when I was in 5th grade through eminent domain. The school district said that they had a plan for better public use of these lots here. These were all low wealth homes, 1-2-bedroom homes, all Latinos families. And this is actually Google Maps. I just pulled it up right now. And still 28 years later, it is still a vacant lot with a chain link fence around it. And so I ask myself, you know, whenever I pull up the Google map or I go by to visit friends and family in Brawley, I ask myself, how is this for the betterment of the public than having families and having children and having life in that place? And then this is also really significant snapshot too. Our family would go to church. Actually, this was our family church here. And, you know, it was an influential place for me. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but as an undergrad, I was studying to be in the ministry. And I had always, church was a place that didn't accept my queerness and who I was. And I was going to an undergrad school that you could get kicked out if you came out. And so I ended up actually changing my major my junior year of college to whatever I had the most credits in, which was political science and history. And that kind of, that'll lead me to my part 2 of the story later on. But essentially the otherness I felt in that space really also helped shape how I do my work today, and also ensure that anyone in a space that I'm facilitating never feels a sense of otherness there as well, that everyone is welcome and included. And that the other thing too is that there are huge ramifications for the types of decisions we have potential influence over, right? And ensuring that the people that are going to be most impacted from those decisions, whether it be their kid, you know, not being able to safely cross the street, or the family that is in fear of being displaced from their home, through different planning mechanisms, whether it be eminent domain or whether it be they can't pay their rent, that those things aren't taken lightly, and that those voices are front and center in all that we do. So yeah, thanks for having me here today.
Thank you. That's everybody. Those are such amazing stories, and you just realize that how we're all connected. What I can't say, none of us are millennials, because none of us have a privileged background. We all grew up in these same locations as Latinos in these communities, so we bring a different sense of planning to the planning policy. You know, for us, it's all about survival. It's about the squatch. It's about taking the bus. It's about doing it ourselves, putting the world together ourselves. And I think what's different about American planning is about right and wrong. You're in compliance, you're not in compliance. You know, it's really simple and broken down. But for us, it's about how we survive, and how we're really kind of changing this whole. The U.S. planning is like a Titanic. It's just this one way of thinking that's just going to break pretty soon, because it can't allow for resiliency. Because what we're bringing in resiliency and sustainability and different ways of thinking about spaces, given our backgrounds. You know, we just have really diverse backgrounds about how places feel and how communities create themselves, you know, through social cohesion, through all these different networks, you know, and I think that's what we kind of advocate for in our work overall. And that's a really important topic on changing U.S. planning policies today in this country, because such as this stuff isn't really allowed for, even planned for. So yeah, well, thank you very much for all your stories, because it really kind of solidifies who we are as LGBT Latino planners. We all have almost the same story, you know, just in different locations with the same kind of characteristics. So yes, this kind of sets the tone for who we are. And now we're going to talk about, you know, our career choices. You know, I've known most of you for many years, and I've seen your careers develop. You know, I remember talking to Michael Méndez when he was an intern at Metro, you know, before he started his research. And so tell us about your journey from Cal State to CSUN to MIT, Berkeley to Yale, now to Irvine, and you work on environmental justice. Just really briefly, that journey.
Great, thank you for that. Yes, I had a very diverse and very professional background and very experiences, and great people like James and others that really help uplift my opportunities and expose me to different ways of thinking and different opportunities to pursue. I don't consider myself a traditional urban planner, planner. I'm a policy planner. Before going back into academia, I spent 13 years in Sacramento working in the state legislature as a senior consultant, as a lobbyist, as a gubernatorial appointee, and then an advisee to the California Air Resources Board. And so that has really influenced my way in conceptualization of how I seek to improve the urban context, the environmental context, primarily to the political and policy-making process, and understanding how there's larger structural issues that are impacting the way our communities look, where our infrastructure goes, and what are equity considerations. So I'm thankful for that opportunity. And then now as an academic, I seek to work on policy relevant research at the intersection of environmental justice, public health, and particularly on climate change. And and a lot of that is derived from my work in the professional world, in the policy world, as well as growing up in low-income communities that face multiple environmental sites. And I want to share with you one of two of my latest works right here. I don't know if you can see this. This is my new book, From the Streets: How Conflict and Collaboration Strengthen the Environmental Justice Movement. This is through Yale University Press. So, and this is actually the first book that Yale University Press has published on the sole topic of environmental justice. So they've been around for a long time and never really focused on justice and people of color in a whole monograph type of a book. And I want to read a quick quote that I include from Alan Turing at the beginning of the book. Sometimes it's the people no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine. So Alan Turing, as you may know, was a mathematician and a scientist that cracked the Nazi code through World War II, and he was also queer. And but he didn't receive a lot of the accolades he had because he was gay, and he actually had suffered chemical castration by the British government because he was gay, and eventually committed suicide. And that's where my work has really taken, telling those stories of people that you don't really think of anything of, but they're the ones really. And that's what I do through my work of climate change, environmental justice, is centering people of color and focusing on people, place, and power in the context of climate change and inequality. So to sum up, my experience it's an embodied experience from my experience growing up in these environmental justice communities, as well as working in powers of authority and knowledge making and politics around these environmental issues. So that's really what my focus is now in academia and training the next generation of environmental scholars and practitioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. How about you, Alfredo? Tell us about your journey. When I first met you in Boyle Heights, probably 20 years ago, you started the City Lab and you started your development. So tell us how that's been going, that journey.
Great. And congrats, Mike, on the book. That's amazing. That's really incredible. And I really sort of want to start there in relation to my journey and what I'm proud of. My background has always informed my work, and I've always approached my work through a social justice lens. When I went to law school, I went to law school on a full scholarship because I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. That was really the goal I had. And I ended up working on legislation, and actually that's where I met Mike in Sacramento, working on legislation to try to publish cleanup standards that were being used in wealthier communities to make sure that those cleanup standards that were pretty rigorously evaluated by our state agencies, that they should also apply to low-income communities, communities of color. And through that work, I was exposed to environmental justice. I was exposed to land use issues and the disparate impacts that we talked about earlier. And I found a calling. You know, I love politics. It was a product of Richard Alatorre when he was the council member of his leadership council. I remember going to the Horseshoe at City Hall and being amazed and really being impacted by those individuals that I thought had the levers of power, right? And Richard was a person that looked like me. I remember when I went to, when I got accepted to Harvard, he took me to his office and handed me an envelope with money. And he was so proud of the fact that another Chicano was getting accepted to this Ivy League institution that he reached out to his friends and said, can you guys help me support this young student? And that made a world of difference to me. You know, I was able to buy winter clothes. I didn't know what the hell snow was. I hadn't left California before I went to East Coast. I hadn't been on a plane. And that story for me is important. The reason why I share it is that for me, what drives me is giving back, is paying it, right? But you don't pay it back. You know, Maya Angelou always talks about paying it forward, that you already have owned your place in our world, in our society, in our movement, through the sacrifices of people that came behind us. Your obligation is to pave the path for people that are going to come after you. And I always believe in that. As it relates to the land use piece, James, what I'll share with you is that about 12 years ago, I started a nonprofit called, at the time, Leadership for Urban Renewal, LEARN. And we started it with the simple concept around the idea that the people in our community that, as Monique mentioned, that cross our streets, that live with busted sidewalks, that lived and played in parks that were fenced off at night, that had all of these, you know, elements that said you don't belong, it's not yours, it's not public. Those are the people that were selling, you know, their wares and the tienditas in the street. Those are the people that were the experts, the real land use experts, not the planners in City Hall. Those were the folks that needed to be consulted. The old señoras, right, that walked to the marqueta, that actually had to experience the unsafe conditions in our sidewalks. It had to have through, you know, the fact that there's no traffic calming measures in a lot of our sidewalks. The fact that we don't dedicate the public space truly to the public. And for us, starting this nonprofit was really focused on making sure that we tip that balance, that we really look to those experts, and those expertise informed the planning decisions that were being done at City Hall. I'll give you one example of that I'm really proud of, and that is legalizing mobile vending in the city of LA. We had a lot of organizations that were empowering our vendedores, our entrepreneurs, and that was really an important piece. But for me, the question was, we can continue to empower them and give them money to buy, a new cart, or to get that, the supplies that they needed to sell their goods. But they were still getting, their stuff was still getting confiscated. They were still getting tickets. At the time, they were still getting reported to ICE, right? And so until made their dignified work, right, their entrepreneurial work legal, we were not going to solve the problem. So our organization started the movement to finally legalize street vending in Boyle Heights, in the city of LA, generally, first initially in some areas, and then ultimately citywide. And then we worked with Ricardo Lara to legalize it statewide, which was a powerful thing that we did, starting with and leading by the folks that were the experts, which was the mobile vendors. They're saying, you were doing things to feed our family. We need to be protected by government and not the other way around. And so that's, for me, an example of how I leverage my expertise in land use and land use policy as an attorney to say, you know what, basta, ya estuvo. We had street vendors at the turn of the century. We want to acknowledge the fact that they're responding to a demand. They are business people first, and we got to protect them. And so I'm happy to, to be able to share that story. I have plenty of other stories, but I want to cede my time to my other colleagues on the panel. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, I want to welcome Viviana Franco. She just joined in right now, and she runs a nonprofit called Lot to Spot. And I met you when you were at UCLA in replanning school, and now you have your own nonprofit called Lot to Spot, and you're really kind of trying to shape the open space and local communities. So just tell us about your journey. How you got there.
Hi guys, apologies for being late. I haven't been in the office for a while, and there were some technical difficulties. So please, I respect your time and all of you. My story, again, Viviana Franco, Executive Director from Lot to Spot. I became a planner without knowing what a planner was. The reason I got into this field or industry was basically, I think a lot of your stories, I know many of you, was from my direct relationship with my neighborhood, with my built environment as a kid. Growing up in a low-income community in the South Bay, we were one of the last houses next to the 105 freeway, right? Los Angeles, the last freeway to be ever built. And that completely transformed our neighborhood, completely cut us off from any access to green space. And so that absolutely, we grew up playing, me and my brothers and sisters, my cousins. We have a very typical Mexicano community here in the Los Angeles area, where it's like a colonia, like aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody lives on the same block, and we grew up playing on these vacant lots in low-income neighborhoods, where they are neglected, where they are abandoned, where you have absentee landlords. So these vacant lots that were like playgrounds to us, ballparks, soccer fields, were full of like needles and used condoms and oil. And we didn't realize at the time that that was not good. You know what you know. It wasn't until I went into an affluent high school, it was my first time seeing a neighborhood where there was like a supermarket next to houses, senderos, walkways. And I was like, damn, where's the liquor store? I remember asking that in my first time in high school anyways. And that's when I became aware of racial inequities in the built environment. At the end of the day, no matter what, we've always said, I started this organization, as James said, it was just my thesis in grad school. And I never said I wanted to go to grad school. I never wanted to start a nonprofit. I didn't want to be an ED. I kind of just learned that along the way. And so that's where From Lot to Spot started. It was my thesis at UCLA to convert these underutilized, abandoned, vacant properties into green spaces, because we have a plethora of those spaces in our neighborhoods, and then we have a huge lack of green space, access to green space, and food security, right? Gardens and things of that nature. No, the journey has been difficult. There's been people, absolutely. I've had amazing mentors, Alfred being one of them, that, I stand on the shoulders of giants. And even though, we've been doing this work forever, this is where we're at right now, From Lot to Spot. And I guess it kind of sounds kind of nihilist, or maybe, it's a post George Floyd world for us. It's different. We've always been known to push a little harder in those boardrooms, right? Or in those spaces where the words land use racism made people uncomfortable. It's a new day. Oh, we don't care. We don't care if it makes you uncomfortable. It's a reality, and the progress we've made. The nihilist vision I wanted to share was basically in terms of, we've been doing this work. I do feel like we're very impactful. I feel, there's a ton of people doing impactful work like you guys. And then at the end of the day, you're like, damn, you look at 15 years ago when I started, or it's like, how much progress have we really made, right? And for our communities of color, for Latino communities, for Black communities, we got to push harder. That's something I know it may be deviating from the subject, but we're very, we're not coming in with pitchforks and burning, but we're definitely coming in with the word radical is not dirty anymore. The word radical change or radical policy cannot be scary anymore. We're done with like, oh, it takes time. Change takes time. Oh, policy takes time. Black men are being killed every day. Latino kids are dying of cancer at Cancer Alley along the 710. And we're making minimal progress. And this is not to hate on anyone who's been doing this work for communities of color. It's just kind of a message for us that we need to push harder. I'm tired of being on the periphery. I'm tired of being ostracized. I'm tired of our communities being ignored. And sure, we've made some progress. It's not enough. And these are the discussions and the lexicon that we're using with politicos, with our elected officials. That's why, I think a lot of you are political. One tiny last thing, there's a new wave, vote them out. I'm sorry, these old Democrats and progressives that fought for us, that, took whatever, 10 years, it's not enough. It's not enough anymore. It's not enough. The old Democrat and the old progressive, no one's buying that anymore. And if we really want to change systemic racism, which, the conversation around Black Lives Matter, it's brown, what's the saying? Brown lives for Black lives, or no? Oh my God, anyways, mi lucha es tu lucha. What we're working for, it's gonna help us. And we just have to be, I think it's time to be, be a little bit more, put more pressure, more, to get political will, to get the projects, the policy, the money in our communities that we need.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Apologies for being late.
Okay, thank you. So Monique, you just started your firm, Pueblo Planning. Tell us about that. We talked about, starting your private consulting firm. You're probably one of the few Latinx LGBT firms around.
Yeah, no, thanks, James. Well, it really was influenced by something that happened 15 years ago. I didn't know about planning. I had graduated from undergrad and went to grad school to study political science. And I went back to my hometown and to finish up my graduate thesis. And I was invited to a community-led meeting at a bar where all revolutions start. And I went because a family friend asked me to go. And I found out in that bar that what was being proposed, and at the time I didn't know words like this, like environmental justice communities. I just knew it was my community. I didn't know that I lived in an environmental justice community. And I go to this meeting and I learned that a company wants to come in and build a sewage sludge incinerator. So sewage sludge is the stuff at the bottom of wastewater treatment plant. And they wanted to import it from all over Southern California and burn it there because the water's cheap, the land is cheap, and so are the political officials. So they thought they could dump in our community. So I ended up getting involved. I was only supposed to stay there about 6 months in my hometown and finish up my research. And then I didn't know what I was going to do after then. But I ended up staying about 3.5 years and got involved in a grassroots campaign and co-authored a ballot initiative with a friend of mine, Rosie Nava, to basically prohibit the importation of these types of industries into Imperial County. But in that process, I would have to go to the county planning department to find out where this company was in their permitting process. I didn't know who planners were. I was like, who are these people that hold all this information? I'd go back 3, 4, 5 times, ask them for information, and they would turn me away because I didn't have the precise planning language to ask for what I needed there. But I was persistent, kept going back until I got what I needed. And then I learned in that process what was being proposed in my community had been planned 5-10 years prior. But the way that they did community engagement is they put a little public hearing notice in the newspaper in words that nobody understands. The planning hearing is 30 miles away in El Centro in the middle of the day when working people are working. And so I learned about the planning process through this experience. What the other thing I learned though, and I'll make this, I'll get right to the punchline. We ended up beating that company. We passed our ballot initiative by 60% of Imperial County wide vote. So now all of Imperial County is protected from those types of industries. But what I learned in that process is that community members have a vision for what they want in their community, and they together collectively can make that vision happen. And so since then, I decided, years later, about 4 years later, and I think this is where I met you, James, go back to school and study planning so that I could be a better community advocate. And about 4 years ago, I started my own, social justice planning firm, really running it as an experiment. Can we do planning that intentionally includes communities that are often left out, either intentionally or unintentionally, and center those voices? Can we do planning that's not extractive, but one that is rooted in reciprocity and healing? And so that's what I've been working, in partnership with many communities and community-based organizations in the Southern California area to do. And but it really stems from not only my childhood experiences, but that experience I had in my early 20s, very formative years, when I'm like, who the hell are these planners? And why do they lock out communities like mine? And really like thinking about how can we include communities. For myself at Pueblo Planning, we do a lot of art making and storytelling. And these are two vehicles that resonate with community members, and that community members can easily share their vision, share their passion, share their hopes and dreams. And we really just play the role as facilitators, not experts in these spaces, as listeners in these spaces, and capture that information. And then we also try to do that translation work until, into ways that city officials can understand, instead of the other way around, making people have to learn the language that city exclusionary language that city officials use. So that was really formative in my direction, and it still informs the work that I do at Pueblo Planning today. Which it's a 4-year experiment, still going strong. We're still learning. We're still humbly learning. We've made mistakes along the way, but we really at the heart of what we do is really to center the voices of individuals who the planning, design, or policy decisions are going to most impact.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's a really important part of the community engagement, how to get inside the inner workings of the political or the policy machine or the planning machine. So we're at 6:51 and we still got 4 more people. So we might have to just go 10 minutes over, is that okay with people? To go 10 minutes over? Okay, so Elena, let's hear about your journey. I think you're on mute.
You would think that with, 5 Zoom meetings a day, I wouldn't make that mistake. I was destined to be a people's lawyer. My abuelito was a people's lawyer. He fought in the Mexican Revolution and was one of the authors of the laws that created the ejido system, the land cooperative system in Mexico. And he was most of his career, he defended ejidatarios against US multinational corporations that would try to take their land away. So I grew up hearing the stories of the people's lawyer who got paid with chickens and corn and stuff like that. So, and he was argumentative and a peleonero, and I was argumentative and a peleonera from the moment I could talk. And I was always told, eres igualita tu abuelito, not always intended as a compliment. So I knew I was going to be a lawyer from a very, very early age, and I became a people's lawyer and doing the same kind of work, not representing campesinos, but stopping displacement in Los Angeles. In 2007, I went to Mexico and was there during the whole plantón in Mexico City, where the PRD had taken over the city. And I couldn't get anyone in my family to go with me to the plantón. And I remember being in the crowd and feeling someone touch my shoulder. And I turned and there was really no one there. And I knew that it was my abuelito letting me know that he was there with me and that he was proud of me. I am very proud of the work that we're doing right now. There has never been so much housing insecurity in the history of the state of California. In LA County, we have 491,000 families at risk of eviction for not paying their rents, amongst other, and that's just the start of it. And at the same time, there has never been so much housing security because of the good work that advocates, including my staff and I, have done to get these temporary protections for people. And so the eviction rate is down 89% from pre-COVID figures and 1,000% from what we were expecting. And I know I go to bed every night knowing that my abuelito's proud of me for that, because while it might not be the same as creating the ejido system in Mexico, it is making a real impact for people in the state of California. Thank you for letting me share.
Ari, let's hear your story. Ari, sorry.
Well, these stories are really traumatic. But, one of my stories is that, again, growing up in Nuevo Laredo, we lived in a brick house, middle income. My dad had a late model luxury car, and we would park it inside the, in the gates. But across the street, there was a makeshift, encampment, basically, of very many families who were living there in small little shacks, probably about the size of my bathroom at home, and whole families living in there, dirt floors, cardboard, tin roof, and cardboard walls and tin roof. And as a kid, I asked for a tour because I couldn't, what is it? How do people live? So I had seen that, and I'd been there inside there. But one night, from my bedroom window, I saw it burn. I saw it burning, and I knew that all those families were going to be displaced. And it was sad enough how they lived, but then to realize that number one, they could have been hurt, and then two, their housing is gone. And we're talking like probably 100 families that were like that. So, I think that night is like, what can I do to help the community, to help you know, in the struggle, you know. So one of my, I had shared that story recently, and I thought about it some more, and I realized that not only was that impactful, but the other part that was impactful was that the next time I came to visit my dad, because my parents were divorced, then they had rebuilt. They were back. They were back living in their, you know, they rebuilt their housing, and so it really showed me about resilience of our community. And but in thinking about more, I'm like, that's great that they're resilient. It's terrible that they were living in those conditions. It's great that they were resilient, but at the same time, it's not something that we should accept in terms of how they're living and the conditions that they're living in. And so this is what, you know, kind of drives me in terms of trying to create a better space for our community. And in the interest of time, I want to share that one of the things that we're working on through Latino Equality Alliance, as you can see behind me, I love this picture so much, I had to have it. The little gay flag back there and our Leia logo. And then on the other side, there's the panaderia over there. Love that. The tree right over here. So we're talking about, you know, what is the space that our community lives in? And again, you know, I think we know the stat that over 40% of LGBT youth, or rather 40% of the youth that are homeless identify as LGBT. And so for me, I'm like, one, that shouldn't be, and two, I don't want to ship them out of their community on top of the fact that they're out of their home. And so we want to keep them near their network, their social network, and so on. So hopefully we will be able to push Leia to help in that situation in terms of policy, in terms of housing opportunities. We are partnering with Jóvenes Inc. and other organizations, including the LA Gay and Lesbian Center. But I'm hoping that we're able to push a lot more of that type of service within the Latino communities. You know, we're trying to prevent a homelessness, because most of those kids that, if it's not an economic issue for the family, it's actually it's a homophobic issue. So we can try to address the homophobic part of the situation as well through family support and all that. So it's all complicated in terms of, you know, the layers of how policy and all that come together. I put in the notes some stuff about the Health Innovation Community Partnership, which I'm involved in on behalf of Leia. We're working on, you know, health delivery and jobs and local hiring practices, and also the reuse of the hospital, of the general hospital, and we're hoping that will include housing. And, you know, when we did a community gathering, you know, I invited some folks from our community, and they provided the feedback that they need to have transgender housing and this and that, and the people that were running the show were shocked to hear that. So I said, well, then we made an impact, so that's good. Now let's keep pushing. So you know, that's why I appreciate knowing all of you, getting to know you, and all the work that everybody does. And you know, we need to keep pressing policies and pulling those strings to make things happen for our community. So thank you for participating today, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you. And Ulises, tell us your story from SLO to DC to back to LA.
Yeah, so I bumped into urban planning actually by accident at UC Santa Barbara. I majored in Chicano studies and geography, and my last semester at Santa Barbara, I took a class in urban issues, and that's when I learned, like, oh, there's a career where you could help create laws to help shape your community to make it a better place. Oh, there's a career where you could plan transportation systems. I want to be an urban planner, so I decided to go into to go to Cal Poly for my master's in urban planning. I think that made me always, that training in Chicano studies always gave me this critical lens and this advocacy lens. So I did my research at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Actually, when I was in grad school, I was an intern in various municipalities. And in those meetings, I remember doing the outreach with the homeowners, with the landowners. And I said, what about the people? The people are missing. We're creating plans without the community input. So that is when I did some research on Broadway, bringing back Broadway in downtown LA. So what I did, I said, you know what, let me go to how the people want to see that street being changed. So I went and I surveyed the people on the street. So most of the people is that one of the most busiest Latino pedestrian cities in the city of LA. And I surveyed and I said, you know what, this is an ethnic enclave and we never analyze it through that lens. So I asked people, hey, do you think Broadway's a barrio? And they said, yeah, from where? Like, oh, from Olympic Street all the way to Olvera Street, like this big old corridor. Like yeah, and back then it wasn't gentrified. It had this market feeling to it. So then I asked them, like, what do you like about this street? What are the some social components that you like? You know what? I see my neighbors. I come to just people watch. The economics, I love the vendors. I love the feeling of markets. I also like to go to my botanicas. I like my music. I love this chillante rascuache aesthetic on Broadway. So I asked those, you know, usually planners usually ask very simple questions. What do you like? What do you dislike? What do you like to preserve? And you get the questions that you need. But if you ask people, what here reminds you of your homeland? What here reminds you of your hometown? You get to get more better in-depth data.
Yeah, that's great.
So that kind of let me go into Washington, D.C. I did the fellowship with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. I got to work for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I got to work for the League of United Latin American Citizens doing advocacy. And that led me back to California, to Sacramento, doing some legislative work there. And now I came back. My goal was always to come back to my hometown, to go work for the CLA Urban Planning. And now I focus on housing policy implementation. I focus on the implementation of affordable housing policies such as density bonus law. I help implement the transit-oriented communities program, and I help also implement some of the new bills that have been coming out of Sacramento, such as SB 35, Assembly Bill 2162, SB 330. And some of the key things that I help enforce is that make sure that if a house is going to be demolished, it has to be replaced with affordable units. And also one thing that I would say, as I think as a Latino planner, we say how being a strict interpretationist and working within the law is going to benefit the most people. So definitely like elevating issues, bringing it up to my manage. And I think I'm really proud to say that LA is a leader and creating more affordable housing, creating more and making sure that we are on top of these new mandates that are coming out from Sacramento.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, today, Richard, tell us about your journey from when I met you at UCLA. I met you at USC at a class, and there you did transportation work.
Sí, soy la más chiquita. I just graduated last year, so I'm like, career. What career? Pero I se los voy a dar rapiditas, no? Because we're coming on time. And my work is very interdisciplinary. I'm an artist, I'm a social worker, and I'm an urban planner. And I carry all those things very, very proudly. My identities as a brown person, I don't use the word Latinx for a lot of its own anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous root that's in that word. I use brown porque soy moreno. Y cuando me preguntan por mi nopal, orgullosamente en la frente. So I am moreno and I identify as queer, as a Jota in particular. And to me, those aren't identities that I carry, but rather lenses through which I do my work. And I will be remiss if I wouldn't honor the folks who brought me into this work, who happen to be Black women. Dr. Destiny Thomas, from the CEO and founder of the Thrivance Group, Tamika Butler, and Patrice Cullors when I was with the Bus Riders Union. So I will honor them as well. And so my work is so different, right? So as I guess a professional, I work for, soy bien malinche, and I work at the Department of Transportation for LA Vision Zero. You're
an infiltrator.
I'm an infiltrator, but let me tell you, nobody warned me that when I got city badge, I was going to get city baggage. And I am mad at that because it is a lot. and my spirit is hurt all the time. So I have to be an artist. And as an artist, I incorporate a lot of the work that I do specifically around performance theory, and performance theory really informing in the way that we actually do traffic safety a lot of the time. So basically, to give it simple, what we've been doing is that we've been centralizing the car as the artist and the pedestrian as the audience. But what happens if we begin to restage the street and consider the pedestrian the artist, the holder of truth, and the car the audience?
Yep.
And so what I'm doing with that on November 1st in El Dia de los Santos, I'm doing a performance art piece called Del Camino de Vermont, where I'm walking the entire bus route from 120th to Sunset as an homage to folks who have been riding the bus during the global pandemic. We as urban planners should be asking what are the conditions that led folks to still ride the bus, and we should be addressing those things, right? That is community trauma, and really addressing those things, can we get to really changing the built environment? I think a lot of my work then more theoretically is a little bit different. My work has been rooted in anti-racism work for a long time, but I think, and I will admit that the last year my work has shifted to pro-Blackness. And I'm very intentional about using the word pro-Blackness because we as Brown people, Latinos, and Chicanx need to have conversations that our communities are rooted in anti-Blackness. Como Moreno, I can tell you the number of times that I've been told, put on sunblock so you don't get more darker, implying that a proximity to Blackness is wrong. So by being pro-Black and liberating Black communities, I know that I will also be liberated. And so in addition to that, my work is centered around deconstructing the way that we look at the built environment. Planners, let me be hella real, we are not observers of the built environment. We are participants of the ecology. So until we can get to something that I'm calling bioreconciliation and reconciling with the fact that we are part of this environment, the way that we've been trained as planners, that is white supremacy and the Cartesian model that has affected all of us. Y estamos en el desmadre en que estamos ahorita, with the climate change that we're in. So academically, I write more about city consciousness, this idea that I'm calling bioreconciliation and bio-being as a way to look at the city. And then more, I guess, professionally, I love community engagement. It's like that I love walking. I love the stories that are in our communities. I still buy pan from the panaderia on Vernon and Vermont so they stay afloat. Like there's these stories of like the liquor store on my block, like my the homegirl that works at the front, she calls me chula. And it's like, how do I take that story, you know, with me into the spaces that I'm in? So I'm just very mindful of all those things. And if you want to know more, ahí les pongo la information, the Instagram. You can read my article on Planning Magazine called Planners as Therapists, Cities as Clients. Y ya, pues ahí estamos.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been a very, very informative talk. I'm glad we had this time together. You really heard our stories and really kind of bonded with everybody else. So you just got to keep on fighting. And maybe we'll do this in the next couple of months. We'll bring in new speakers and new ideas. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, James, for facilitating. Really appreciate it. Thanks,
And
everyone.
Before we go, I want to make sure that everyone in the audience caught my posts. Nobody should be displaced during the pandemic. There is no reason for it. Please reach out for help. And I put all of the information for intake and stuff on the chat. Please take it down. Okay.
Thank you.
Jane, I hope that we could continue this conversation in the future with other webinars. Thank you for this.
Yes, thank you, James.
Thank you.